where the secrets of the heart are written with ink and sealed with scandal. Welcome to channel, The Countess Chronicles.
They called her the spinster aunt, the woman who'd supposedly missed her chance, who'd let her youth slip away, who'd be forgotten in the corner of family gatherings while younger, prettier women captured all the attention. For 12 brutal years, Lady Clarissa endured the whispers, the pitying glances, the well-meaning advice about lowering her standards before it was too late. Her own family had given up on her prospects, relegating her to the role of the unmarried relative who'd help raise other people's children, since she'd apparently never have her own. Society had written her off completely. At 34, with no husband and no prospects, she was considered a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens to women who are too selective, too independent, too stubborn to settle. But here's the secret nobody saw coming, the revelation that shattered every assumption about age, beauty, and what actually makes a woman irresistible to men of extraordinary value. In just 12 seconds, 12 seemingly insignificant seconds, at a ball she almost didn't attend, Lady Clarissa captured the obsessive devotion of Duke Westbrook, the most pursued bachelor in 3 kingdoms, a man who'd rejected countless younger, more conventionally beautiful women. What happened in those 12 seconds contradicts everything you've been taught about attracting quality men. You've been sold the myth that youth equals value, that beauty opens doors, that being eager and available demonstrates interest. You've watched younger women collect male attention effortlessly while you've wondered what you're doing wrong, why your intelligence and depth don't seem to matter, why men who should appreciate you keep choosing options that seem objectively inferior. The painful truth? You've been playing the wrong game entirely. While you've been competing in the beauty pageant, trying to be prettier, younger-looking, more physically perfect, women like Lady Clarissa have been competing in a completely different arena where age becomes irrelevant and conventional attractiveness barely registers. These women understand something that creates an enigma men cannot resist, a magnetic pull that has nothing to do with smooth skin or a certain body type, and everything to do with energy, presence, and strategic emotional positioning. Here's the uncomfortable paradox that'll either liberate you or infuriate you. The moment you stop desperately trying to attract men is the moment you become genuinely attractive to men worth having. Lady Clarissa spent 12 years not chasing, not compromising, not making herself endlessly available to mediocre options out of fear that time was running out. While her family pressured her to settle, while society mocked her standards, while younger, at him, but he became captivated by a 34-year-old woman who looked at him for 12 seconds, then walked away as if he hadn't passed her evaluation. This isn't a story about getting lucky or about one magical technique that solves everything. This is about understanding the fundamental principles of masculine psychology that don't change regardless of what modern dating culture tells you. Men of genuine quality, the ones with options, with resources, with emotional intelligence, with actual character, they're not shopping for the prettiest face at the party because they've already dated beautiful women and found beauty alone to be utterly unfulfilling. What they're desperately searching for, often without even realizing it consciously, is the woman who doesn't need them but chooses them, who has standards that feel challenging to meet, who creates polarity through feminine energy while maintaining independence, who remains slightly mysterious even after years together. They want the woman everyone desires but nobody can fully possess. And that's not about your age or your appearance. It's about the energy you project, the boundaries you maintain, the life you've built that would continue beautifully with or without them. So here's what I'm about to reveal to you over the next 30 minutes. The exact principles Lady Clarissa and women like her employed to transform from overlooked to irresistible, regardless of age, regardless of conventional beauty standards, regardless of how much time you think you've wasted or how many mistakes you've made. These aren't manipulative tactics or dishonest games. They're fundamental truths about attraction, polarity, perceived value, and masculine psychology that work whether you're 22 or 52, whether you're conventionally stunning or refreshingly ordinary. You'll discover why being constantly available destroys attraction faster than almost anything else. Why revealing everything about yourself immediately kills the chase that men are biologically wired to pursue. Why maintaining feminine energy creates magnetic polarity that masculine men cannot resist. And exactly how to deploy the 12-second technique that can shift an entire dynamic in your favor before a single word is even spoken. But I need to warn you, this information conflicts with almost everything popular culture teaches about dating, and implementing it requires courage because you'll be swimming against the current of desperate, available, eager women who make your standards look intimidating by comparison. The conspiracy you've been living under is that time is your enemy, that every passing year diminishes your value, that you should be panicking about your age rather than leveraging the wisdom, confidence, and emotional intelligence that comes with it. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Duke Westbrook didn't fall for Lady Clarissa despite her age. He fell for her because of what that age represented. 34 years of refusing to settle, of building genuine self-worth, of developing interests and depth that 22-year-olds haven't had time to cultivate yet, of learning who she was and what she wanted without compromising for male validation. Her age wasn't a liability. It was proof of standards, evidence of strength, and the foundation of authentic confidence that cannot be faked. The younger women competing for the Duke's attention were performing confidence while desperately seeking his approval. Clarissa embodied confidence because she genuinely didn't need his approval to feel complete. So if you're tired of being overlooked, tired of watching less remarkable women capture the attention of remarkable men, tired of feeling like time is running out and you're losing some race you never wanted to run in the first place, what I'm about to share will fundamentally shift your entire approach. You'll stop seeing yourself as a depreciating asset, desperately trying to sell before your value expires, and start seeing yourself as what you actually are. A rare vintage that becomes more valuable, more complex, more desirable as time reveals your depth. The women who understand this, who embody it, rather than just intellectually agree with it, they're the ones who marry dukes at 34, who have multiple quality suitors at 48, who remain magnetic and pursued at 62. They've cracked the code that has nothing to do with fighting aging and everything to do with leveraging wisdom. Let me show you exactly how they do it, starting with the biggest lie that's been keeping you trapped in the wrong game entirely. There's a secret nobody's told you, and it's kept you trapped longer than you'd ever imagine. You've been sold this enormous lie since you were young, that your worth sits entirely on your appearance, that youth defines your value, that beauty opens every door. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to share. Walk through any upscale restaurant, any charity gala, any high society event, and you'll witness something that breaks this narrative completely. You'll see women well into their 40s, 50s, even 60s, treated like absolute royalty by exceptional men. Wealthy, respectful, powerful men. Meanwhile, gorgeous 25-year-olds sit alone at home, scrolling through their phones, wondering why they can't keep a decent man interested. It's not about age, darling. It's about something far deeper, something that creates an enigma around certain women that others simply can't crack. The vestiges of old thinking, that pretty faces guarantee happiness, have ruined more lives than any other myth we've been fed. Let me paint you a picture from the era of dukes and duchesses, something that revealed this truth in the sharpest way possible. Lady Catherine was the most beautiful woman in 3 counties, porcelain skin, golden hair that cascaded down her back, a figure that made every head turn when she entered a room. Every young lord wanted to court her. Every duchess whispered about her beauty. Every ball centered around her presence. Yet, at 32, she found herself alone in her father's estate, watching from her window as women far less conventionally attractive than her married dukes, earls, and wealthy merchants who treated them like absolute royalty. The mystery that haunted her sleepless nights was simple, but devastating. How did women with ordinary faces and aging bodies capture the hearts of extraordinary men, while she, blessed with beauty that poets wrote sonnets about, couldn't keep a decent man interested beyond a few months? The traces of her mother's advice echoed mockingly in her mind. "Your beauty will open every door, darling." But those doors kept slamming shut. Think about art for just a moment, because this analogy will shift everything. You can walk into any discount store and buy a colorful printed poster for maybe $50. Bright, pretty, catches your eye immediately. Or you could stand in an auction house where an original painting from a master artist sells for millions, even though that print might have been technically prettier to the untrained eye. What's the difference? Rarity, authenticity, the fact that not everyone can possess it. The original has a story, has depth, has layers that reveal themselves slowly over time. It's not sitting in every living room across the country. It's guarded, protected, accessible only to those who truly understand its worth. You're not a mass-produced poster from a shopping mall, available to anyone with pocket change. You're an original masterpiece. But if you behave like you're common, if you make yourself accessible to everyone, if you don't create that air of mystery around your value, well, that's exactly how you'll be treated. Here's where the conspiracy against your happiness comes in, and it's been hidden in plain sight this whole time. Society, media, your well-meaning friends, they've all told you to compete on beauty. Get the better body, the smoother skin, the perfect hair, the trendiest clothes. Spend your money, your time, your mental energy trying to be the most physically attractive option in any room. But that's a game you'll always lose, eventually, because there's always someone younger coming up behind you. High-value men, the ones worth having, they're not shopping for the prettiest face at the party. They've dated beautiful women before. Beauty doesn't impress them anymore. What they're searching for is the woman everyone wants, but nobody can have. They want the one who carries herself like she's already won, who doesn't need validation, who creates this magnetic pull without even trying. That's not about symmetrical features or a certain dress size. That's about the energy you project, the standards you hold, the respect you demand, without saying a word. The real conflict here isn't between you and other women. It's between who you've been conditioned to be and who you actually need to become. You've been trained to see yourself as a product on a shelf, to market yourself based on packaging alone. But premium items aren't sold in regular stores with bright lights and buy one, get one deals. They're kept in exclusive boutiques with appointments required, where not everyone gets access, where the experience itself is curated and intentional. When you shift from seeing yourself as available merchandise to exclusive experience, everything changes. Men who previously would have wasted your time suddenly can't get close enough. Men who would have taken you for granted start treating you with reverence. It's not magic. It's simply understanding how perceived value works in any market, including romantic ones. Now, I'm not suggesting you become cold or fake or play silly games that waste everyone's time. What I'm talking about is authentic self-value that naturally creates boundaries. There's a profound difference between a woman who's playing hard to get and a woman who genuinely is hard to get because her life is full, her standards are high, and her time is valuable. The first is transparent manipulation that men see through immediately. The second is magnetic authenticity that draws quality men in like moths to flame. You don't need to pretend you're busy. You need to actually be busy building a life so fulfilling that adding a man to it is optional, not necessary. You don't need to fake disinterest. You need to be genuinely selective about who deserves your interest. When this shift happens internally, it shows externally without any effort, and that's when everything transforms. The revelation I'm sharing isn't just theory pulled from some dusty psychology textbook. It's lived experience from women across centuries who understood these principles intuitively. In the era of dukes and duchesses, do you think the women who captured the most eligible bachelors were always the most conventionally beautiful? Historical records tell a different story. The women who became legends, who had powerful men competing for their affection, who secured their positions through genuine devotion rather than obligation, they mastered presence over prettiness. They cultivated mystery, maintained standards, and never made themselves cheap through desperation. This wasn't about manipulation. It was about self-respect at such a deep level that it became undeniable to everyone around them. Modern women have lost this wisdom, buried under social media filters and dating app culture, but the principles remain unchanged because human psychology remains unchanged. So here's what separates the women who settle from the women who select. Understanding that your value isn't determined by how many men want you, but by what kind of man you refuse to accept. Any woman can be wanted. Just lower your standards enough, and you'll have plenty of options. But being wanted by men of quality, by men who will cherish and protect and provide, by men who see you as irreplaceable rather than interchangeable, that requires a completely different approach. It requires you to stop competing in the beauty pageant everyone else is obsessed with and start competing in the arena of perceived value, feminine energy, and strategic unavailability. The next principle will show you exactly where most women lose this game before it even begins. The moment they make themselves too easy to reach, too simple to keep, too available to appreciate. But we'll unpack that particular silence that speaks volumes. Now let's talk about the second fatal mistake that's probably costing you the relationship you deserve, and it's hidden in something that seems completely innocent. You think being available shows interest, that responding quickly proves you care, that clearing your schedule demonstrates commitment. But here's the harsh truth nobody wants to admit. The moment you become constantly available, you transform from mystery into obligation, from prize into participation, trophy. Think about anything in your life that's always there. Your couch, your coffee maker, the sky above you. Do you wake up grateful for these things, or do you just expect them to exist? Exactly. Human psychology doesn't value what's guaranteed, what's predictable, what's always waiting patiently in the same spot. This isn't some cruel trick of nature. It's simply how desire works. The secret that high-value women understand is that scarcity creates value, and your time is the most valuable currency you possess. When you hand it out freely to anyone who asks, you're basically announcing to the world that it's worthless. Let me share something from the aristocratic era that changed everything for those who understood it. Lady Victoria was everything a proper noblewoman should be. Educated, refined, from an impeccable family with connections to the royal court itself. Yet she made one catastrophic mistake that cost her the most eligible bachelor in the entire kingdom. And it's the same mistake you're probably making right now without even realizing it. When Lord Edmund, the wealthiest duke in the Northern Territories, first showed interest in her, Victoria's heart soared with possibilities. She made herself completely available to him, accepting every invitation immediately, rearranging her schedule around his whims, responding to his letters within hours of receiving them. She thought she was demonstrating interest, showing him she valued his attention. But within 3 months, Edmund had completely lost interest and began courting Lady Beatrice, a woman Victoria considered far beneath her in both beauty and social standing. The secret Victoria never understood was that constant availability doesn't communicate interest. It communicates desperation, and desperation destroys desire faster than any poison ever could. What was Beatrice doing differently that created such obsessive pursuit from the same man who'd grown cold toward Victoria? The answer reveals everything about male psychology and the game of perceived value. When Duke Edmund first expressed interest in Beatrice, she responded warmly but without desperation. He sent an invitation for dinner that Thursday. She replied that unfortunately her week was fully committed, but perhaps they could arrange something for the following week. He appeared at a social gathering expecting her full attention. She greeted him pleasantly, conversed briefly, then excused herself to speak with others because she genuinely had other social obligations. He sent letters. She responded thoughtfully, but never immediately, always taking 2 or 3 days because she was genuinely busy with her own pursuits. Edmund found himself having to plan ahead, having to work around her schedule, having to earn her time rather than simply claiming it. And this transformed how he perceived her, from another available woman to a prize worth fighting for. Think about the difference between a village market that's open every day versus the exclusive trading fair that comes to town only twice a year, because this comparison illuminates the principle perfectly. The daily market is convenient, always accessible. You can visit whenever you need something without any planning or effort. But do people talk about it? Do they anticipate it? Do they clear their schedules and travel distances to attend? Never. Now, consider the rare trading fair. Merchants prepare for months. Buyers save their money specifically for this event. Everyone marks their calendars and plans around those specific dates. The goods might not even be superior to what's available daily, but the scarcity creates perceived value that drives desire. Lady Victoria was the daily market, predictable, accessible, always open for business. Lady Beatrice was the exclusive fair, available only at specific times, requiring advanced planning, worth the effort to attend. Duke Edmund's response to each was precisely what you'd expect. The revelation that changed everything for women who understood this principle was recognizing that scarcity must be authentic, not manufactured through transparent games. Duchess Cordelia, who successfully married 3 wealthy men throughout her life, each husband treating her better than the last, explained it simply. I never pretended to be busy. I actually was busy because I built a life so fulfilling that men were additions to it, not the foundation of it. She maintained close friendships that genuinely fulfilled her need for connection, pursued artistic interests that genuinely excited her creative spirit, managed her estate's affairs with genuine dedication, and engaged in charitable works that genuinely mattered to her. When Lord Hampton, her 3rd and final husband, began courting her, he quickly discovered that her time wasn't freely available because it was already invested in meaningful pursuits. This wasn't a tactic she employed to attract him. It was simply her reality. And that reality made her irresistibly attractive because it communicated something profound. This woman doesn't need me to complete her life, which means if she chooses me, it's genuine desire rather than desperate necessity. Let me give you the practical traces of this wisdom that you can implement in your own life, regardless of your current situation. First, establish the principle that last-minute invitations receive last-minute consideration. If a man doesn't respect your time enough to plan ahead, he doesn't get immediate access to your schedule. Lady Rosalind practiced this religiously. When Lord Thomas would send word on Friday requesting her presence on Saturday, she'd respond that her weekend was already committed, but she'd be delighted to see him the following week if he'd care to plan something in advance. This simple boundary trained him to prioritize her, to think ahead about when he wanted to see her, to treat her time as valuable rather than infinitely available. Second, never cancel existing commitments for a man who hasn't demonstrated through consistent action that he values you. The Countess of Ashford maintained her charitable obligations, her social calendar, her family commitments regardless of which suitor was pursuing her, and the men who were worthy appreciated this about her, while the unworthy ones eliminated themselves by losing interest. Third, and this is where most women stumble terribly, you must create genuine breathing room in your correspondence and interactions. In the era of handwritten letters, wise women understood that responding too quickly to a gentleman's letter communicated either that you had nothing else occupying your time or that you were desperately waiting for his words. Lady Charlotte would receive passionate letters from admirers and intentionally wait 3 to 5 days before responding, not because she was playing games, but because she was genuinely living her life, and letter writing happened when she had quiet moments to dedicate to it thoughtfully. This created a delicious tension where men would anxiously await her responses, wondering what she was doing, who she was seeing, whether she was thinking of them. The conflict between their desire for immediate validation and her genuine unavailability created exactly the dynamic that maintains male interest over time rather than letting it fizzle out. Now, here's the conspiracy that trips up even intelligent women who understand these principles intellectually but fail to implement them emotionally. They know they should be less available, but when a man they're genuinely excited about shows interest, all their resolve crumbles. They think, but this one is different. This one is special. If I'm not available, he'll move on. So they abandon their boundaries, clear their schedules, become that constantly accessible woman they swore they'd never be again. And inevitably, predictably, the man's interest fades just like all the others. The hard truth that Lady Penelope learned after multiple failed courtships is this: the men who are actually worthy of your time will respect your unavailability, while the men who lose interest when you have boundaries are precisely the men you should be filtering out. Your selective availability isn't costing you good men. It's protecting you from wasting time on mediocre ones who never would have valued you properly anyway. The final piece of wisdom comes from observing what happened when these principles were ignored versus when they were honored. Lady Victoria, who made herself constantly available to Duke Edmund, ended up watching him marry someone else, while she spent years recovering from the heartbreak and confusion of being discarded. Lady Beatrice, who maintained her boundaries and genuine life commitments, not only married Edmund but enjoyed a partnership where he continued pursuing her affections throughout their marriage, because that initial dynamic of her being selectively available never quite disappeared. Decades into their marriage, Edmund would still plan elaborate surprises to earn her delighted attention, still compete for her time against her other interests, still feel that subtle anxiety that maybe, just maybe, if he took her for granted, she'd redirect her affections elsewhere. That's the power of establishing yourself as valuable from the very beginning. It creates a foundation that sustains attraction indefinitely. But scarcity of time is only one element of the larger strategy. There's something even more powerful that keeps a man perpetually intrigued, something Lady Isabella mastered so perfectly that she had 5 marriage proposals in a single season. and it has everything to do with emotional restraint. Lady Isabella committed what seemed like social suicide at the Grand Winter Ball of 1847. Yet that single act of calculated indifference transformed her from overlooked wallflower into the most pursued woman in 3 kingdoms. When Duke Harrison, the most eligible bachelor in attendance, heir to vast fortunes and political influence, finally approached her after she'd watched him dance with 7 other women, Isabella did something that shocked everyone present. He extended his hand, expecting her eager acceptance, but she smiled politely and said, "How kind of you to finally notice me, Your Grace, but I'm afraid I've promised the next several dances to others, and must honor those commitments." Then she turned away and walked directly toward a much less impressive gentleman who'd asked for her company earlier. The Duke stood frozen in disbelief. No woman had ever refused him, especially not for someone of lower status. That refusal, that demonstration of indifference to his status and charm, ignited an obsession in him that lasted months and ultimately led to marriage. The secret Isabella understood was that men of high value are hunters by nature, and nothing kills a hunt faster than prey that offers itself willingly. Let me show you the catastrophic mistake that Lady Arabella made with the exact same Duke years earlier, because her failure illuminates why Isabella's approach worked so brilliantly. When Duke Harrison first showed interest in Arabella at a garden party, she became immediately effusive with gratitude and enthusiasm. She spent the entire afternoon following him around, laughing loudly at his every comment, asking questions about his life with breathless interest, essentially telegraphing that she was already deeply invested in the possibility of him. By the evening's end, she'd revealed her entire life story: her difficult childhood, her fears about remaining unmarried, her dreams of becoming a duchess, her insecurities about her appearance. She thought she was creating deep connection and showing authentic vulnerability. What she was actually doing was handing him a completed puzzle, with no remaining mystery to solve, no challenge to overcome, no discovery left to pursue. Within 2 weeks, Harrison had moved on to other prospects, leaving Arabella confused about what went wrong when she'd given him everything he could possibly want to know about her. The contrast between these 2 women's approaches reveals a fundamental truth about masculine psychology that most women either don't understand or refuse to accept. Men of substantial means and status, dukes, successful merchants, military generals, men with real power and options, they're accustomed to conquering challenges in every domain of their lives. They've built empires, won battles, overcome obstacles that would destroy lesser men. When they encounter a woman who requires no effort to win, who surrenders her attention and affection immediately, who presents no challenge whatsoever, their conquering instinct has nothing to grip onto. It's like a master swordsman being handed a victory without drawing his blade. There's no satisfaction, no sense of achievement, no reason to value what was gained because it cost nothing to obtain. Duke Harrison had dated dozens of beautiful, accomplished women who threw themselves at him the moment he showed interest. Arabella was just another in that forgettable line. But Isabella, she was the enigma he couldn't solve, the fortress he couldn't easily breach, the prize that required strategic effort to win. Think about the great hunting expeditions that noblemen would organize: weeks of planning, expensive equipment, dangerous terrain, uncertain outcomes. They'd return from these hunts with trophies they'd display prominently and stories they'd tell for years, even though they could have simply purchased any animal they wanted from farmers and merchants. The value wasn't in the animal itself. It was in the conquest, the challenge, the test of their skills against worthy prey. Now, compare that to walking into a barn where tame animals eat from your hand without hesitation. There's no story there, no accomplishment, no reason to remember or value the interaction. Lady Arabella was the barn animal, domesticated, eager, offering herself without any requirement of skill or effort from the hunter. Lady Isabella was the wild game, elusive, unpredictable, requiring patience and strategy and genuine effort to approach successfully. Duke Harrison's masculine instinct responded to each exactly as nature designed him to respond. The revelation that separates women who inspire obsessive pursuit from women who inspire polite disinterest is understanding that emotional restraint early in courtship isn't cruel. It's essential. Duchess Marianne, who turned down 4 marriage proposals before accepting the 5th from a man who'd pursued her for 2 years, explained it perfectly. The moment you reveal your complete hand in this game, you've given away all your power. Not because power itself matters, but because mystery and gradual discovery are the foundations of sustained fascination. When Lord Pemberton first expressed interest in Marianne, she was genuinely excited. He was everything she'd hoped to find. But instead of showing that excitement openly, she remained pleasantly cordial but emotionally measured. He'd send passionate letters expressing his growing affection. She'd respond with warmth, but never matching his intensity. He'd declare his feelings. She'd smile and say she was enjoying getting to know him. This wasn't manipulation or game-playing. It was emotional intelligence recognizing that unearned intimacy feels cheap, while gradually earned intimacy feels precious. Let me give you the practical framework that Isabella and Marianne both employed, consciously or unconsciously, that you can implement immediately in your own interactions. First, establish the 70-30 rule in all communications. For every 10 exchanges, let him initiate 7, while you initiate 3. This creates a natural dynamic where he's pursuing your attention rather than you pursuing his, which is exactly where masculine energy thrives. When Lord Sebastian was courting Lady Caroline, she noticed he'd send her letters or visit her estate multiple times for every once she'd reach out to him. This wasn't calculated coldness. She was simply less invested early on, which paradoxically made him invest more heavily to balance the equation. Second, never reveal all your layers at once. Treat your personality, history, dreams, and vulnerabilities like a series of gifts given gradually over time, rather than dumped in his lap during the first meaningful conversation. Third, and this is absolutely critical, practice emotional unpredictability within stable parameters. Lady Sophia mastered this beautifully with the Count of Devonshire. Sometimes she'd accept his invitations enthusiastically, other times she'd graciously decline due to other commitments. Sometimes she'd engage in deep conversation. Other times she'd be pleasantly superficial. Sometimes she'd show subtle vulnerability. Other times she'd maintain complete composure. The Count never quite knew which version of Sophia he'd encounter, which kept him perpetually on his toes, perpetually interested, perpetually trying to understand her completely. This wasn't instability or mood swings. It was simply being a fully dimensional human, rather than a one-note character performing for his approval. Fourth, demonstrate interest paired with unshakable standards. You can like him while simultaneously making it clear that your affection is conditional on his behavior meeting your requirements. The Baroness Whitmore would tell suitors directly, "I find you intriguing, but I require consistency, respect, and intentional pursuit. If you cannot provide those, I wish you well, but will not continue investing my time." The conspiracy that destroys most courtships is women believing that showing strong interest early will secure the man's commitment, when actually it accomplishes the opposite. Lady Helena thought that expressing her feelings for Viscount Blackwood would reassure him and deepen their connection. So after 3 pleasant outings, she wrote him a heartfelt letter, explaining how much she enjoyed his company, how she felt they had special chemistry, how she hoped they might have a future together. The Viscount received this letter, felt the weight of her expectations, and gradually withdrew over the following weeks until he disappeared completely. Meanwhile, Lady Genevieve employed the opposite approach with the same Viscount years later. After wonderful dates, she'd simply thank him for a lovely evening and leave him wondering whether she felt the same intensity he was beginning to feel. She never pressed for definitions of their relationship, never asked where things were going, never expressed anxiety about his intentions. This drove Blackwood to pursue her relentlessly because the uncertainty was intoxicating. Did she care as much as he was starting to care? He had to know, which meant he had to keep pursuing, keep earning more of her attention and affection. Now, here's where this principle reveals its true power, not just in attracting men initially, but in sustaining their interest indefinitely. Duchess Violet married the Earl of Lancaster after a courtship where she maintained this subtle emotional distance, never quite matching his intensity, always keeping a small part of herself slightly out of reach. 30 years into their marriage, Lancaster would still pursue her affections, still plan surprises to earn her genuine delight, still feel that faint anxiety that maybe he needed to continue proving himself worthy of her. She never became completely predictable, never offered absolute certainty that she couldn't live without him, never surrendered that last trace of mystery that kept him perpetually fascinated. This wasn't coldness or lack of love. They had a deeply devoted marriage. It was simply maintaining the dynamic that made attraction sustainable, over decades rather than months. But emotional restraint is only part of the equation. There's another element that amplifies everything we've discussed, something about the way you carry yourself that either magnetizes exceptional men or repels them entirely. Lady Georgiana discovered this truth when she accidentally stumbled into behavior that made her irresistible, and it has everything to do with feminine energy. Lady Georgiana was everything modern sensibilities would celebrate. Fiercely independent, educated beyond most men of her era, managing her deceased father's estate with iron-fisted competence that rivaled any duke in the region. She could negotiate business deals, oversee agricultural operations, and make financial decisions that grown men struggled with. Yet at 34, she remained unmarried despite her considerable wealth and sharp intellect, watching in silent frustration as less capable women secured marriages to exceptional men. The enigma that haunted her was simple. Why did Lord Ashford, the distinguished military general she'd been courting, suddenly propose to Lady Beatrice, a woman who couldn't balance a household ledger to save her life and depended on others for even basic decisions? The secret Georgiana hadn't understood was that while independence is attractive, masculine energy in a woman repels masculine men. She'd been competing with men rather than complementing them, and no high-value man wants a competitor in his bed. He wants a queen who allows him to be king. Let me show you exactly how Georgiana's approach destroyed 3 potential marriages before she finally understood what was happening. When Lord Ashford would take her to dinner at fine establishments, Georgiana would insist on splitting the bill, explaining that she had her own fortune and didn't need a man to provide for her. When he'd offer to help her with something, carrying packages, managing a difficult estate matter, making a decision, she'd firmly decline, saying she was perfectly capable of handling things herself. When he'd express an opinion about something, she'd immediately debate him if she disagreed, needing to prove her intellectual equality. She thought she was demonstrating strength and independence, qualities she assumed any intelligent man would admire. What she was actually communicating was that she didn't need him for anything, that his masculine instinct to provide and protect had no place in her life, that she saw him as an equal rather than as someone whose masculine energy could complement her feminine energy. After 6 months, Ashford felt completely unnecessary in her presence and drifted toward women who actually seemed to want and need a man's presence. The contrast becomes crystal clear when you observe Lady Beatrice's approach with the same Lord Ashford after Georgiana's failed courtship. Beatrice wasn't as educated, wasn't as wealthy, wasn't as independently capable, but she understood something fundamental about polarity that Georgiana had missed completely. When Ashford took her to dinner, she smiled warmly and thanked him for his generosity, allowing him the pleasure of providing for her even though she could have afforded the meal herself. When he offered to help with something, even something she could handle alone, she'd graciously accept and express appreciation for his strength and capability. When he expressed opinions, she'd listen thoughtfully, ask questions to understand his perspective better, and gently offer her own views without turning every conversation into a debate she needed to win. She wasn't weak or incapable. She simply understood that masculine men need to feel useful, protective, and necessary, and she created space for Ashford to fulfill those instinctual drives. Within 4 months, he'd proposed marriage because being with her felt natural, complementary, and deeply satisfying in a way being with Georgiana never had. Think about how electricity flows between positive and negative charges, because this analogy reveals everything about romantic polarity. You cannot generate electricity by connecting 2 positive charges together. They repel each other. You cannot generate it with 2 negative charges either. Same result. The power, the energy, the magnetic pull that creates connection requires opposite charges meeting. Lady Georgiana was operating in pure masculine energy, assertive, independent, competitive, self-sufficient, and when she encountered masculine men also in that energy, there was no polarity, no attraction, no magnetic pull drawing them together. It was like trying to push 2 magnets together at their matching poles. They'd slide apart naturally. Lady Beatrice, by contrast, maintained feminine energy, receptive, soft, allowing, collaborative, which created perfect polarity with masculine energy. When she was near Lord Ashford, the opposite charges created irresistible attraction that pulled them together effortlessly. This wasn't about Beatrice being weak or Georgiana being too strong. It was about understanding that romantic attraction requires complementary energies rather than matching ones. The revelation that transformed everything for Georgiana came during a conversation with Duchess Helena, a woman who'd successfully maintained both her independence and a deeply satisfying marriage to a powerful duke. Helena explained it perfectly. "Darling, you're trying to be both the king and the queen on the chessboard, which leaves no role for your partner to play. In business, in managing your estate, in your public life, be as masculine as necessary, command respect, make decisions, demonstrate strength. But in romance, you must soften, receive, allow him the pleasure of being needed by someone he considers worth protecting." This wasn't about pretending to be helpless or diminishing her actual capabilities. It was about consciously choosing which energy to operate from in different contexts. The Baroness Thornfield managed vast shipping operations during the day, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But when her husband returned home each evening, she'd greet him warmly, ask about his day with genuine interest, allow him to handle certain household matters, even though she could have done them herself, and create an atmosphere where his masculine presence felt valuable rather than redundant. Let me give you the practical framework that wise noblewomen throughout history employed to maintain feminine energy without sacrificing their intelligence or independence. First, let him provide and pay in courtship. This isn't about money. It's about allowing him to demonstrate his ability and desire to care for you. When Duke Pemberton courted Lady Amelia, she had her own considerable wealth, but always allowed him to handle expenses for their outings. She'd express sincere gratitude for his generosity, which reinforced his masculine instinct to provide and made him feel good about pursuing her. Second, ask for help even when you don't strictly need it. Men are wired to feel valued when their strength or capability is needed. Lady Caroline would ask Lord Richmond to open jars, reach high items, move furniture, or offer opinions on decisions, even when she could have handled these matters independently. This wasn't manipulation. It was giving him opportunities to feel useful and appreciated, which strengthened his emotional investment in the relationship. Third, and this is where most independent women stumble badly, compliment and acknowledge his masculine qualities rather than competing with them. Lady Georgiana used to respond to Lord Ashford's accomplishments by immediately sharing her own equivalent achievements, as if they were in competition. Lady Beatrice, by contrast, would genuinely praise his military victories, his strategic thinking, his leadership qualities without needing to prove she possessed similar capabilities. She'd say things like, "I feel so safe when I'm with you," or "I love how decisively you handle difficult situations," or "Your strength is one of the things I admire most about you." These statements reinforced his masculine identity and made him associate feeling strong, capable, and valuable with being in her presence. Fourth, maintain your strength, but express it softly. Duchess Cordelia had strong opinions and wasn't afraid to share them, but she'd phrase disagreements gently. "I see your perspective, and I wonder if we might also consider," rather than, "You're wrong, and here's why." She'd stand firm on her boundaries, but express them with grace rather than aggression. The conspiracy that confuses modern independent women is the false belief that demonstrating need or allowing men to provide somehow diminishes their strength or independence. Lady Georgiana believed this completely. She thought accepting help meant admitting weakness, that letting men pay meant surrendering equality, that showing vulnerability meant giving away power. This rigid thinking cost her years of loneliness until she finally understood the truth. Allowing a man to be masculine in your presence doesn't make you less capable. It makes him feel essential, which is the foundation of male devotion. The Countess of Ashford, who maintained her shipping empire while enjoying a passionate marriage, explained it simply. "I can open my own carriage door, but I let my husband do it because it brings him joy to care for me. I can make every decision about my business, but I ask his opinion because making him feel valued costs me nothing and enriches our connection. I'm perfectly self-sufficient, but I never make him feel unnecessary because why would I push away someone who wants to add value to my life?" The final piece of this wisdom reveals itself in what happened to these women long-term. Lady Georgiana, once she understood these principles, adjusted her approach with the Marquis of Thornbury, maintaining her intelligence and capability, but expressing them through feminine energy rather than masculine competition. She'd still manage her estate brilliantly, but would ask Thornbury's perspective on major decisions, not because she needed his permission, but because she genuinely valued his input and wanted him to feel involved in her life. She'd still maintain her independence, but would graciously accept his gestures of provision and protection. Within 8 months, Thornbury proposed, telling her she was the perfect balance of strength and softness, capability and receptivity, independence and partnership. Meanwhile, women like Lady Beatrice, who'd understood this naturally from the beginning, enjoyed decades of marriages where their husbands continued pursuing them, continued wanting to provide for them, continued feeling lucky to have them. The polarity that attracted these men initially never disappeared because the women understood how to maintain it indefinitely. But there's still one more element to this strategy, something that keeps men perpetually fascinated even after years together. And it has everything to do with maintaining layers of mystery. Lady Sophia mastered this so perfectly that her husband was still discovering new depths to her personality after 20 years of marriage. Lady Sophia committed what seemed like a terrible social blunder during her first meeting with the Earl of Devonshire at an exclusive gathering in his countryside manor. While other women eagerly shared their entire life stories within the first hour of conversation, detailing their childhoods, their families, their hopes and dreams, Sophia answered his questions with intriguing brevity that left more unsaid than said. When he asked about her travels, she mentioned briefly visiting Constantinople but changed the subject before revealing details. When he inquired about her artistic pursuits, she smiled mysteriously and said only that she enjoyed exploring various creative expressions. Other women at the gathering thought she was being evasive or cold, but the Earl found himself utterly captivated, spending the entire evening trying to unravel the enigma before him. 3 years into their marriage, he would still discover hidden talents, unexpected knowledge, and surprising depths to her personality that kept him perpetually fascinated. The secret Sophia understood was that mystery isn't about lying or hiding. It's about revealing yourself in carefully measured doses that keep someone wanting to discover more. Let me show you the catastrophic mistake that Lady Anastasia made with the same Earl several years before Sophia came into his life. During their first private dinner together, Anastasia, desperate to create deep connection and intimacy, essentially conducted a therapy session at the dining table. She told him about her difficult childhood with an absent father, her fears about never finding true love, her insecurities about her appearance compared to other women, her previous failed engagements and what went wrong in each, her anxieties about social expectations, and her dreams of becoming a countess. She thought she was being authentic and vulnerable, creating the emotional intimacy she'd read about in romantic literature. What she was actually doing was overwhelming him with information he hadn't earned yet, solving every mystery about who she was before he'd even developed genuine curiosity. By the end of that single evening, the Earl knew practically everything significant about Anastasia's inner world. There were no layers left to discover, no depths remaining to explore, no questions burning in his mind about this woman. Within 2 weeks, his interest had completely evaporated, not because anything she'd revealed was unattractive, but because the journey of discovery had ended before it truly began. The contrast between Sophia's approach and Anastasia's reveals a fundamental truth about human psychology that applies far beyond romance. Think about the most captivating novels you've encountered, the ones that revealed their secrets gradually, layer by layer, keeping you turning pages desperately wanting to understand what came next. Now compare those to stories that explain everything in the opening chapter, leaving no mysteries to unravel. Which ones did you finish? Which ones did you remember? Which ones made you feel genuinely invested in the outcome? The same principle governs human relationships. Lady Sophia was a complex novel that revealed new chapters over time, each discovery making the Earl more invested in understanding the complete story. Lady Anastasia was a book summary. All the key points delivered up front with nothing left to wonder about. The Earl's masculine psychology, wired for hunting and conquering challenges, had nothing to pursue with Anastasia, but found endless fascination in gradually uncovering who Sophia truly was beneath her carefully maintained layers. The revelation that changed everything for women who mastered this art was understanding that mystery doesn't require pretense or deception. It simply requires patience and strategic disclosure. Duchess Marguerite, who maintained her husband's obsessive devotion for 34 years until his death, explained it beautifully. "I never lied about who I was, but I never rushed to reveal everything either. Each year of our marriage, he'd discover something new, a talent I'd never mentioned, a piece of my history I'd never shared, a depth of knowledge in some unexpected area. Not because I was hiding things, but because I understood that discovery is more intoxicating than delivery." When Lord Harrington first courted Marguerite, he'd ask about her past, and she'd share one carefully selected story that answered his question while opening 3 new questions in his mind. He'd inquire about her interests, and she'd reveal one passion while subtly alluding to others she might explore later. Over months and years, he kept peeling back layers, kept discovering new dimensions, kept finding reasons to remain fascinated by this woman who never quite gave him the complete picture all at once. Let me give you the practical framework that Sophia and Marguerite both employed to maintain healthy mystery without becoming manipulative or dishonest. First, practice the iceberg principle. In any interaction, especially early ones, reveal only about 10% of yourself while keeping the other 90% below the surface. When Duke Rothschild asked Lady Beatrice about her education, she mentioned studying literature and music, but didn't elaborate on her fluency in 4 languages, her extensive knowledge of political philosophy, or her talent for botanical illustration. Each subsequent conversation, he'd discover another hidden depth. "You speak Italian? I had no idea." Or, "You understand military strategy? How fascinating." These discoveries made him feel like he was constantly learning about someone far more complex than he'd initially realized. Second, delay vulnerability strategically. Save your deeper fears, past traumas, and profound insecurities for when genuine trust has been established through time and consistency. Third, maintain interests and activities beyond his awareness. Lady Cordelia would pursue hobbies, maintain friendships, and engage in activities that her suitor didn't know about initially. When he'd ask what she'd done that day, she had genuinely interesting answers that revealed ongoing parts of her life he wasn't yet privy to. This created the subtle impression that her world was vast, and he was only seeing a portion of it, which maintained his curiosity about what else existed in her universe. Fourth, be selectively mysterious about certain aspects while being openly transparent about others. This creates balanced authenticity rather than calculated game-playing. The Baroness Whitmore would be completely honest about her opinions on books, politics, or social matters, but remained somewhat enigmatic about her past romantic experiences, her deepest fears, and certain childhood memories. This combination of openness and selective privacy felt natural rather than manipulative, intriguing rather than frustrating. The conspiracy that destroys mystery in most courtships is the anxiety-driven need to prove yourself completely, to lay all your cards on the table immediately, to demonstrate that you have nothing to hide and everything to offer. Lady Victoria felt this desperately during her courtship with Viscount Blackwood. She wanted him to know she was educated, so she'd discuss every book she'd read. She wanted him to see she was well-traveled, so she'd recount every journey in detail. She wanted him to understand her values, so she'd explain her entire philosophical worldview in one sitting. The irony was that this complete transparency made her entirely predictable, entirely known, entirely solved. Blackwood's interest waned proportionally to how much he learned because there was nothing left to discover. Meanwhile, Lady Genevieve, with the same Viscount years later, would mention reading but never specify which books unless asked directly, would reference travels without elaborating on details unless he pursued the conversation, would hint at philosophical perspectives without delivering complete manifestos. Blackwood found himself constantly curious about what else existed in Genevieve's mind, constantly asking questions to uncover more, constantly engaged in the delicious process of discovery. Now, here's where this principle reveals its true power over decades, rather than just during courtship. Lady Sophia, 30 years into her marriage with the Earl of Devonshire, maintained his fascination through continuous self-development that created new mysteries to replace solved ones. She'd take up unexpected hobbies. At 45, she began studying astronomy. At 50, she learned Arabic. At 53, she started composing music. Each new pursuit meant the Earl was perpetually discovering facets of his wife he hadn't known existed. She'd also carefully maintained certain private spaces in her life. A journal she kept but never shared, correspondence with friends he didn't read, thoughts she processed independently before discussing. This wasn't secretive or suspicious behavior. It was simply maintaining the healthy boundary that she was a complete person beyond just being his wife, which paradoxically made him more invested in understanding all her dimensions. The Earl would tell friends that after 3 decades together, his wife still surprised him regularly, still revealed unexpected depths, still kept him wondering what else he didn't know about this fascinating woman he'd married. The final wisdom in maintaining mystery comes from understanding that it must be paired with genuine substance. You cannot maintain intrigue through evasiveness alone. Lady Penelope tried this unsuccessfully, thinking mystery meant being vague and withholding without actually having interesting depths to reveal. When suitors would eventually uncover what lay beneath her mysterious exterior, they'd find nothing particularly remarkable. She'd built an elaborate facade around an empty core. Contrast this with Lady Sophia, Lady Marguerite, and Duchess Cordelia, all of whom maintained mystery around genuinely rich, complex, continuously developing inner worlds. They read extensively, traveled when possible, cultivated diverse interests, maintained deep friendships, engaged in meaningful charitable work, and continuously learned and grew. Their mystery wasn't artifice, it was the natural result of being legitimately interesting people who understood the value of gradual revelation. The traces of their wisdom echo through generations, be worth discovering, then make the discovery a journey rather than a transaction. But even all these principles combined still miss the single most powerful technique that can transform a casual interaction into obsessive pursuit in mere seconds. Lady Clarissa discovered this accidentally during a chance encounter with a duke, and what happened in those 12 seconds changed the entire trajectory of her life. Lady Clarissa wasn't supposed to be at the Royal Autumn Ball of 1852. She'd only attended because her cousin had fallen ill and gifted her the invitation at the last moment. She stood near the marble columns observing the spectacle when Duke Westbrook, the most sought-after bachelor in the entire kingdom, entered the ballroom. Every unmarried woman present immediately shifted their attention toward him, adjusting their gowns, positioning themselves in his line of sight, preparing their most charming smiles and witty opening remarks. But Clarissa, exhausted from the journey and indifferent to the social maneuvering around her, simply watched him with calm curiosity as he greeted various guests. Their eyes met across the crowded room. What happened in the next 12 seconds defied everything young women had been taught, about attracting noble suitors, yet it worked more powerfully than any conventional strategy ever could. Clarissa held his gaze steadily for what felt like an eternity, allowed the faintest hint of an approving smile to grace her lips, then deliberately turned away and walked toward the terrace doors as if he'd already been evaluated and dismissed from her consideration. The Duke stood frozen, captivated by this woman who seemed utterly unbothered by his presence. Let me show you exactly why those 12 seconds created such profound impact when dozens of other women had spent the entire evening trying and failing to capture Duke Westbrook's interest. The other ladies had employed every traditional technique. Lady Henrietta accidentally positioned herself where he'd have to notice her. Lady Beatrice laughed loudly at everything he said, hoping to appear delightful. Lady Margaret found excuses to touch his arm and lean in close during conversation. These women were operating from scarcity and desperation, trying to capture something they feared they couldn't get naturally. Their behavior communicated, "Please notice me. Please choose me. Please validate me with your attention." Duke Westbrook, accustomed to this treatment from every woman he encountered, found it utterly boring and predictable. But Clarissa's 12 seconds communicated something entirely different. "You're interesting enough to observe, but I'm not impressed enough to pursue. If you want my attention, you'll need to earn it." This flipped the entire dynamic. Suddenly, he was the one wondering whether he measured up, whether she found him worthy, whether he could capture the interest of someone who seemed indifferent to his status and charm. The secret embedded in those 12 seconds activated 3 critical psychological triggers that create male obsession rather than polite interest. First, the extended eye contact, 4 full seconds of unwavering gaze, communicated confidence and evaluation. Clarissa wasn't looking at him with hope or eagerness. She was studying him like one might study an interesting painting, assessing whether it merited further attention. This immediately elevated her above other women because confident assessment implies options and standards. Second, the subtle smile, lasting approximately 2 seconds, suggested approval without enthusiasm, interest without desperation. It said, "You pass initial inspection," rather than, "I'm already smitten with you." This created just enough positive reinforcement to intrigue him while withholding enough enthusiasm to prevent certainty about her feelings. Third, and most powerfully, the deliberate turn and departure, 6 seconds of her gracefully walking away from his presence, communicated that she had somewhere else to be, someone else to see, something more important than standing around hoping for his attention. This final element transformed her from pursuer to pursued in his psychological framework. Think about how noblemen approached hunting the rarest game in the kingdom, because this analogy illuminates why Clarissa's technique worked so devastatingly well. When deer would run from hunters, it triggered their chase instinct. The movement away activated their desire to pursue and capture. But when deer would approach hunters directly, making themselves easily available, hunters would often not even bother taking the shot because there was no challenge, no satisfaction in the easy kill. Duke Westbrook had women approaching him constantly. They were the deer walking directly to the hunter, offering themselves without any requirement of skill or effort. Clarissa was the magnificent stag that glanced at the hunter with intelligent eyes, then bounded away into the forest. Suddenly, the hunter's entire focus narrowed to that one creature, that one challenge, that one prize worth pursuing above all others. Her 12 seconds of eye contact, smile, and departure triggered every conquering instinct bred into Westbrook through generations of aristocratic competition. He had to know who this woman was, who seemed immune to his usual appeal. The revelation that sophisticated noblewomen had understood for centuries was that the first impression creates the entire framework for how a man will pursue you, or whether he'll bother pursuing at all. Duchess Evangeline, who'd employed similar techniques decades earlier to capture her husband's obsessive devotion, explained it perfectly. Men of quality are predators by nature, bred for conquest through centuries of warfare, politics, and competition. If you present yourself as prey that's already caught, the hunt is over before it begins. But if you present yourself as prey that notices them, evaluates them, then escapes, you've initiated a hunt they cannot resist. When Lord Ashford first encountered Evangeline at a diplomatic reception, she'd employed precisely this technique, met his eyes with confident assessment, smiled slightly as if she'd reached a private conclusion about him, then turned her attention to someone else entirely. Ashford spent the next 2 hours working his way through the crowd, trying to get back into conversation with her, a woman whose name he didn't even know yet, but whose indifference had made her instantly irresistible. Let me break down the practical application of this 12-second technique so you understand exactly how to deploy it in your own circumstances. The first 4 seconds require steady, confident eye contact. Not the shy, hopeful glances that desperate women employ, but the direct, evaluating gaze of someone who's sizing up whether you meet her standards. Lady Victoria practiced this by imagining she was a queen, evaluating a potential knight for her service, assessing competence, character, and worthiness rather than hoping for approval. This internal framework automatically adjusted her facial expression and energy to communicate confidence rather than need. During these 4 seconds, resist every urge to look away first, to giggle nervously, or to break the tension with premature speech. Let him feel the weight of being truly seen and evaluated by someone who isn't automatically impressed. The next 2 seconds involve the subtle smile, not an eager, grateful for attention beam, but a slight, knowing curve of your lips that suggests, interesting, but I'm reserving judgment. Lady Marguerite described this as the smile you'd give when tasting expensive wine, appreciative of the quality, but not overwhelmed by it, recognizing value while maintaining discernment. This smile should never reach your eyes fully. Keep it controlled, measured, sophisticated. It's the difference between the smile of someone grateful to be noticed and the smile of someone graciously acknowledging that you've managed to capture their attention temporarily. The final 6 seconds are critical. You must physically turn away and move towards something or someone else. Not a hesitant turn with backward glances, but a decisive movement that communicates you have places to be and people to see. Lady Clarissa described feeling terrified during this part. Every instinct screamed to stay, to engage, to secure his interest before walking away. But she forced herself to turn calmly and move toward the terrace, trusting that creating space would generate more attraction than filling space with desperate conversation. The conspiracy that prevents most women from employing this technique successfully is the fear that if they don't immediately capitalize on male interest, they'll lose their opportunity forever. Lady Caroline tried the 12-second technique with Viscount Thornbury, but panicked during the turning away phase. She made eye contact, smiled, began to turn, then immediately turned back and started conversation because she couldn't tolerate the uncertainty of walking away. This completely destroyed the effect because it revealed her anxiety, her need for validation, her fear of losing him. The power of the technique lives entirely in your willingness to genuinely walk away and be comfortable with the outcome either way. Duke Westbrook pursued Lady Clarissa specifically because she seemed perfectly content to leave without his validation. She wasn't performing confidence, she was embodying it through her willingness to literally turn her back on the most eligible man in the room. That authentic indifference, that genuine, "you're interesting, but I'm fine either way" energy, created magnetic attraction that desperation never could. Now, here's where this technique reveals its deeper power beyond just initial attraction. It establishes the entire relationship dynamic from the very first interaction. When Duke Westbrook finally worked his way through the crowd to reintroduce himself to Lady Clarissa later that evening, he approached her as a supplicant rather than a benefactor. He had to work to recapture her attention, had to prove himself interesting enough to keep her engaged, had to operate from a position of pursuing rather than being pursued. This dynamic, established in those 12 seconds and reinforced during their first conversation, never fully reversed throughout their courtship. Even after they married, Westbrook maintained a subtle anxiety that his wife could survive perfectly well without him, which kept him perpetually invested in being the kind of husband worth staying with. The 12 seconds weren't just a technique to spark initial interest, they were a framework for lifelong dynamic where he valued what he'd had to work to win and never took for granted something that had come to him easily. The final wisdom about this technique comes from understanding when and how to deploy it without it becoming manipulative theater. Lady Clarissa's success stemmed from the fact that she genuinely wasn't desperate for Duke Westbrook's attention. She'd lived a full life before meeting him and would have continued living fully if nothing developed between them. Her 12 seconds weren't calculated manipulation, but authentic expression of her genuine emotional state. "You're attractive, but I'm not needy." When women try to perform this technique from a place of hidden desperation, men sense the inauthenticity, and it backfires completely. The Countess of Ashford, who'd taught this principle to numerous younger noblewomen, always emphasized, "Before you can successfully walk away from a man, you must genuinely be willing to walk away from him." The technique only works when it reflects your true internal state, that you're interested but not invested, curious but not desperate, open but not needy. This is why building a genuinely fulfilling life, independent of romantic outcomes, isn't just preparation for this technique. It's the foundation that makes the technique work at all. Now, all these principles we've explored, from maintaining mystery to strategic unavailability to feminine magnetism to this 12-second technique. They're powerful individually, but there's a way to weave them all together into an approach that transforms you from someone men date casually into someone they cannot imagine losing. So here we are. You've just learned the exact principles that transformed Lady Clarissa from the spinster aunt into the Duchess of Westbrook. The same secrets that have allowed women throughout history to capture the devotion of exceptional men regardless of age, regardless of conventional beauty standards, regardless of what society claimed was possible for them. But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to hear. Knowing these principles means absolutely nothing if you don't actually implement them. You can watch this entire video, feel inspired for an evening, then wake up tomorrow doing exactly what you've always done, being too available, revealing too much too soon, competing in the beauty pageant instead of the value game, operating in masculine energy that repels the very men you want to attract. Or you can make the decision right now, in this moment, to fundamentally shift how you show up in your romantic life and start embodying the woman who gets chosen by men worth having. Let me ask you something directly, and I want you to answer honestly, just to yourself. What would your life look like 6 months from now if you actually applied everything you just learned? Imagine yourself maintaining genuine scarcity because you've built a life so rich that men are additions rather than the foundation. Imagine responding to male attention with confident evaluation rather than grateful eagerness. Imagine holding your standards firmly, while other women compromise theirs out of fear and desperation. Imagine walking away from situations that don't serve you because you genuinely know your worth rather than just intellectually claiming it. Imagine creating the kind of polarity that makes masculine men feel necessary, valued, and desperate to prove themselves worthy of your selection. Now ask yourself the harder question. What will your life look like 6 months from now if you do nothing? If you let fear or doubt or old patterns keep you trapped in the same cycles that haven't been working? Here's what I know about you if you've watched this far. You're not like most women who give up at the first sign of challenge or who need their hand held through every decision. You've got intelligence, you've got depth, and somewhere inside you, there's a woman who knows she deserves better than what she's been settling for. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. And I didn't create this content to entertain you. I created it to transform you if you're willing to do the uncomfortable work of changing. So here's your assignment, your actual homework, that separates women who talk about change from women who embody it. Choose one principle we discussed today, just one, and implement it completely this week. Maybe it's establishing genuine unavailability by filling your calendar with activities that fulfill you independently of male attention. Maybe it's practicing the 12-second technique the next time you encounter a man you find interesting. Maybe it's consciously shifting into feminine energy in your next romantic interaction instead of competing or controlling. But here's the critical part. You have to actually do it, not just think about doing it or plan to do it eventually when conditions feel perfect. Perfection is a prison that keeps you stuck forever. Imperfect action beats perfect planning every single time. Lady Clarissa wasn't perfect when she employed these principles. She was terrified, uncertain, going against everything her family and society told her to do. But she did it anyway. And those 12 seconds of courageous authenticity changed her entire life trajectory. What 12 seconds? What small, brave action, what single boundary could change yours? And more importantly, what's stopping you from taking that action today, right now, instead of 6 months from now, when you'll wish you'd started today? Now, let me get provocative for a moment, because comfortable words don't create transformation. How many more years are you going to waste believing the lies that have kept you trapped? How many more mediocre men are you going to give your precious time and energy to before you decide you deserve extraordinary? How many more, younger, less remarkable women are you going to watch marry quality men while you tell yourself it's too late for you, you've aged out, you've missed your window? Lady Clarissa wasted 12 years believing those lies before she discovered the truth. But she still discovered it and transformed everything. You have that same choice right now. The question isn't whether these principles work. We've seen centuries of evidence that they do. The question is whether you'll actually trust them enough to implement them, whether you'll have the courage to be different from desperate women around you, whether you'll value yourself enough to maintain standards even when fear whispers that you should lower them. Here's what happens to the women who actually apply this information versus those who just consume it passively. The women who implement these principles, who genuinely build fulfilling lives, who maintain authentic scarcity, who embody feminine polarity, who preserve mystery, who hold unshakable standards, they're the ones sending me messages months later about the quality of men suddenly pursuing them, about former interests who'd gone cold, suddenly reappearing with renewed intensity, about feeling genuinely confident in their worth for the first time in years. Meanwhile, the women who watch but don't act, they're still in the same situations 6 months from now, still frustrated, still wondering why nothing ever changes, still blaming their age or their appearance or their circumstances, instead of recognizing that transformation requires different actions, not different conditions. Which woman will you be 6 months from today? I want you to understand something crucial. You're not too old. You're not too late. You haven't missed your chance. But you do need to stop playing by rules designed to make you feel inadequate and start playing by principles that recognize your actual value. The myth that youth and beauty are everything? It's a conspiracy designed to keep you desperate, insecure, and willing to settle for less than you deserve. The truth that women like Lady Clarissa, Duchess Eleanor, Lady Sophia, and countless others throughout history have proven. Your value increases with the wisdom, confidence, and self-knowledge you develop over time, if you choose to leverage it instead of apologizing for it. The dukes, the generals, the exceptional men with real substance. They're not at bars picking up 22-year-olds. They're noticing women like you who carry themselves with the quiet confidence that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to diminish yourself for anyone's comfort. So here's my final challenge to you, and this is where you make the decision that either changes everything or changes nothing. Stop waiting for perfect circumstances. Stop waiting until you've lost 10 more pounds, or fixed that thing about yourself you think is broken, or feel completely confident before you start implementing these principles. Start now, messy and imperfect, scared but determined, uncertain but committed. Build that life so rich that romantic relationships become optional, additions. Establish boundaries around your time and energy that communicate value. Practice the 12-second technique even though it terrifies you. Maintain mystery even when anxiety tempts you to reveal everything immediately. Operate in feminine energy even when independence feels safer. Hold your standards even when fear whispers that you should compromise. And watch, genuinely watch with curiosity rather than desperation, what happens when you stop chasing and start selecting. If you found value in what I've shared today, if something resonated deeply enough that you're actually considering implementing it, then I need you to do 2 things. First, subscribe to this channel and activate those notifications, because I'm going to continue sharing the advanced principles that sophisticated women use to not just attract exceptional men, but keep them devoted for decades. This video covered the foundations, but there's so much more depth to explore. The subtle communication patterns that create obsession, the framework for maintaining polarity after marriage, the techniques for handling specific challenging situations, the psychology of male pursuit, and how to amplify it naturally. Second, leave a comment telling me which principle you're committing to implement this week. Not because I need the engagement, but because public commitment increases your likelihood of actually following through. Tell me, will you practice strategic unavailability? Master the 12-second technique? Shift into feminine energy? Establish the mystery that keeps men fascinated? Declare it. Commit to it. Then actually do it. Remember, Lady Clarissa was called the spinster ant for 12 years before she became a duchess in 12 seconds. Your transformation might not happen in 12 seconds exactly, but it starts with the decision you make right now to stop believing the myths that have kept you small and start embodying the truth that makes you irresistible. The men who are worthy of you are out there right now, searching for exactly what you offer. Frustrated that they keep encountering desperate women without standards when what they actually want is a woman who knows her worth and refuses to compromise it. Be that woman. Not someday when conditions are perfect, but today, right now, in this moment. Your future self, the one who's being pursued by quality men, who's making relationship decisions from abundance rather than scarcity, who finally understands her genuine value She's counting on you to be brave enough to start. Don't let her down. Now go implement what you've learned, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll dive even deeper into the advanced strategies that separate women who get chosen from women who get cherished.